You've been lied to your entire life. Every 4th of July, you light fireworks. You wear red, white, and blue. You celebrate independence. But here's the truth nobody wants to tell you. America didn't become independent on July 4th. Not even close. Let me blow your mind right now. The vote for independence happened on July 2, 1776. That's when the Continental Congress actually decided to break free from Britain. John Adams was so sure July 2nd would be the day Americans celebrated forever that he wrote to his wife Abigail about it. He said future generations would celebrate with parades, games, and fireworks. He was right about everything except the date. So why do we celebrate the 4th? Because that's when they approved the wording of a document. Just the wording. They argued about commas and phrases while the real decision had already been made 2 days earlier. Think about that. Our biggest national holiday celebrates editing a document. But it gets weirder. The Declaration of Independence wasn't even signed on July 4th. Most delegates didn't sign it until August 2nd. Some didn't sign until months later. A few never signed it at all. The whole thing is a beautiful accident of history that we've turned into gospel truth. And the fireworks you love so much? They're not even an original American tradition. The Chinese invented fireworks over 1,000 years ago. We just borrowed them because John Adams suggested illuminations for the celebration. Here's what really happened in July 1776. The colonies had been moving toward independence for over a year. Fighting had already started at Lexington and Concord in April 1775. By July 1776, men were dying in a war that had no official purpose yet. Congress needed to make it official. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia introduced the resolution for independence on June 7. Congress debated it for weeks. They knew this decision meant war, possible execution for treason, and the destruction of everything they'd built. These weren't brave heroes rushing into glory. They were terrified men making an impossible choice. On July 1st, they took an informal vote. 9 colonies said yes to independence. 2 said no. 2 abstained. It wasn't enough. They argued through the night. Think about being in that room. The summer heat in Philadelphia was brutal. No air conditioning. Windows shut tight so spies couldn't hear. Men sweating through their clothes while deciding whether to commit treason against the most powerful empire on earth. John Dickinson of Pennsylvania stood up and begged them not to do it. He said they weren't ready. Britain would crush them. They'd all hang. He wasn't wrong to be scared. Benjamin Franklin supposedly joked that they must all hang together or they would all hang separately. But that joke carried the weight of reality. If they lost this war, every man in that room would be executed. On July 2nd, they voted again. 12 colonies voted yes. New York abstained because they hadn't received permission from their home government yet. But it was enough. Independence was declared. John Adams went home that night believing July 2nd would live forever in American memory. He had no idea he'd be forgotten. July 3rd and 4th were spent arguing over Thomas Jefferson's draft of the Declaration. Jefferson had written this soaring document about human rights and freedom. Congress tore it apart. They cut out entire sections. Jefferson sat there fuming while they edited his masterpiece. They removed his passionate condemnation of slavery. They softened his harsh words about King George. They argued over individual phrases. Jefferson hated every minute of it. Finally, on July 4th, they approved the final version. But approving the document and signing it are two different things. The version they approved that day was sent to the printer. Only John Hancock and Charles Thomson signed it on the 4th as President and Secretary of Congress. The famous signing scene you picture never happened. You know the image. All the founders gathered around a table, quill pens in hand, signing this sacred document together in a moment of unity. Total fiction. Most delegates signed a month later on August 2 when the official parchment copy was ready. Some signed even later. Thomas McKean claimed he didn't sign until 1781, 5 years later. The signing was boring administrative work spread across months. But here's what bothers me most about the July 4th myth. We've turned the American Revolution into a single day. One moment of fireworks and glory. We forget it was a brutal 8-year war that tore the colonies apart. We forget that many Americans stayed loyal to Britain. About a third of colonists were patriots fighting for independence. Another third were loyalists who wanted to stay British. The final third just wanted to be left alone. This wasn't a united country rising up together. It was a civil war. Neighbors fought neighbors. Families split apart. Brother killed brother. The revolution destroyed lives. Thousands of loyalists had their property seized. They were tarred and feathered. They were driven from their homes. After the war, about 60,000 loyalists fled to Canada or Britain because they weren't safe in America anymore. We don't talk about that on July 4th. We don't talk about how many enslaved people fought for Britain because the British promised them freedom. We don't talk about how the revolution meant nothing for them because America kept slavery for another 89 years. We don't talk about Native Americans who sided with Britain because American colonists kept stealing their land. The revolution was a disaster for indigenous peoples because it removed the one government that sometimes tried to limit colonial expansion. July 4th has become mythology. And I'm not saying we shouldn't celebrate. I love fireworks as much as anyone. I love the idea of independence and freedom. But we should at least know what we're celebrating. The truth is messier than the myth. The truth is that independence wasn't declared on July 4th. It wasn't signed on July 4th. It wasn't even the end of anything. It was barely the beginning. The war lasted until 1783. That's 7 more years of fighting after the declaration. 7 years of suffering and death and uncertainty. The Treaty of Paris that officially ended the war and recognized American independence was signed on September 3, 1783. If we wanted to celebrate the day America actually became independent, that would be it. But we don't celebrate September 3rd. We celebrate July 4th because that's when they approved the document. We celebrate the paperwork. And even the document itself isn't what you think. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Those words are powerful. They've inspired people around the world for centuries. But the men who wrote them owned slaves. Thomas Jefferson owned over 600 enslaved people during his lifetime. He fathered children with Sally Hemings, a woman he owned, who couldn't legally consent because she was his property. The contradiction is staggering. They wrote about equality while denying it to most people. Women couldn't vote. Black people were enslaved. Native Americans were being displaced. Poor white men without property often couldn't vote either. The Declaration promised freedom to a very select group. It took the Civil War to end slavery. It took until 1920 for women to get the vote. It took until 1965 for the Voting Rights Act to protect Black Americans' right to vote. It took until 1971 for 18-year-olds to vote even though they could be drafted to die in war. The promise of July 4th took centuries to even partially fulfill. And we're still working on it. But here's what I think is actually beautiful about all of this. The Declaration of Independence was aspirational. It laid out ideals that America didn't live up to. It created a standard we could measure ourselves against. Every movement for justice in American history has pointed back to those words. Abolitionists quoted the Declaration to argue against slavery. Suffragettes used it to demand voting rights. Civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. held America accountable to its own stated values. The document gave people a weapon to fight for actual equality. So maybe it doesn't matter that we celebrate the wrong date. Maybe it doesn't matter that the signing happened later. What matters is the idea. The idea that people have rights. The idea that governments derive power from the consent of the governed. The idea that when government becomes destructive of those rights, people have the right to change it. Those ideas were revolutionary in 1776. Most of the world lived under kings and emperors who claimed divine right to rule. The idea that ordinary people could form their own government was radical. Dangerous. Unthinkable to most people. The Declaration didn't create perfect freedom. But it created space for the possibility of freedom. And that possibility has spread around the world. The French Revolution happened 13 years later and borrowed heavily from American ideas. Latin American independence movements in the 1800s looked to the Declaration. Anti-colonial movements in the 20th century used similar language about self-determination and human rights. The words mattered even if the reality fell short. So when you're watching fireworks this July 4th, remember you're not celebrating the day America became independent. You're celebrating the day we declared what we wanted to become. You're celebrating an idea, not an accomplishment. You're celebrating the gap between our values and our reality, and the constant struggle to close that gap. And maybe that's more honest than pretending July 4th was some perfect moment when everything came together. The real story is more complicated. It's full of flawed people making difficult choices. It's full of contradictions and compromises and outright hypocrisy. But it's also full of possibility. The founders weren't superhuman heroes. They were regular people who did something extraordinary while also doing terrible things. They created a system that was deeply flawed but contained the seeds of its own reform. They wrote principles they didn't fully believe in or live up to, and those principles outlived them. That's the actual miracle of July 4th. Not that a group of perfect people created a perfect nation. But that a group of imperfect people created principles that were better than themselves. Principles that future generations could use to make the country better. Every expansion of rights in American history has used the Declaration's language. Every movement for justice has pointed to the gap between American ideals and American reality. The document gave us the tools to improve. And we're still using those tools today. Every time someone protests. Every time someone demands their rights. Every time someone points out that America isn't living up to its stated values. They're doing what the Declaration makes possible. So no, America didn't become independent on July 4, 1776. The vote happened on the 2nd. The signing happened in August. The war lasted 7 more years. The British didn't officially recognize American independence until 1783. July 4th is when we approved the final wording of a document. But that document changed the world. It gave people permission to imagine a government based on consent rather than conquest. It gave people language to demand their rights. It created a standard that every generation has used to push America closer to its ideals. The 4th of July celebrates a promise, not a reality. A promise that we're still trying to keep. And maybe that's exactly what we should be celebrating. Not a perfect past, but an ongoing struggle. Not a finished achievement, but a continuing aspiration. The fireworks aren't celebrating victory. They're celebrating possibility. The possibility that we can be better than we are. The possibility that rights can expand. The possibility that justice can grow. That's what July 4th really means. Not the date on a calendar, but the idea that freedom is worth fighting for even when we fall short. The idea that we can build something better than what came before. So celebrate the 4th of July. Light your fireworks. Wave your flags. Enjoy your barbecue. But remember what you're really celebrating. Not a perfect moment in history, but an imperfect document that gave us permission to keep trying. Not the end of a journey, but the beginning of one that still continues. Not everything you were taught about July 4th is wrong. The spirit is right even if the details are messy. We're celebrating the idea that people deserve freedom. And that idea is worth celebrating, even on the wrong date.